have emotions and think about things. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Hi, welcome to Emotional and Mental Justice. I'm Yuna, and welcome to my podcast. Now, I'm extremely excited to be launching this podcast, simply because I feel that I have waited far too long to begin talking. And you know what? I refuse to wait any longer to begin sharing. So it all starts right here and right now. I will no longer suffer in silence. I will no longer do nothing about those around me that suffer in silence. I feel like I've just taken a vow. So firstly, I'm going to introduce myself. I'll tell you a little bit about me and explain the vision of this podcast. So some years ago, I decided to train as a therapist or a counsellor, whatever you prefer. And prior to embarking on my counselling course, I didn't even realise that mental health affected me. The questions I asked myself and the labels I gave myself were, what's wrong with me? I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I'm different to everybody else. I'm unlovable. I'm just a breathing shell. When will I take my last breath? But you know, today, my breath is everything. And I'm super grateful for my existence. So I'm a fairly open person, and I find beauty in sharing. And you get to learn a bit more about my journey as we continue into future podcasts. So what is the vision of this podcast? It's about our trials and tribulations, trying to understand our own situations and finding the strength to be open about how we've come to be the person that we are today, but also empowering people to not suffer in silence, to be free enough to say, I'm not okay, whilst enabling them to understand that it's okay not to be okay. Some episodes will consist of guest interviews and discussions, and none of which are rehearsed. They're all just a natural flow of conversation based on people's real life situations and experiences, which for me is actually really exciting because I get to hear about some of these stories for the first time. So, speaking of emotional and mental justice, I believe that it is something that as human beings we all seek, and it's definitely something that we all need. But it's also something that I think can be very difficult to attain. What with naturally altered physiological, psychological and biological conditions, such as illnesses, mental health conditions, and also just the impact that they have on us. But also from things like pressures of society. There's peer pressure. There's friends and family's expectations of us that may differ from our own expectations of ourselves. And all of these things affect our ability to fully gain and achieve that mental and emotional justice. And that mental and emotional justice is something I believe is at the core of our sanity, at the core of our self-esteem, our well-being. You know, it's central to the things that help us function and live a healthy, balanced life. So I'm going to talk about the emotional and the mental as two separate aspects, and then I will later link them together. Now, when I look at my dictionary, see, I like to refer to my dictionary because I think that it gives us the true meaning of what a word actually is, as opposed to, let's say, the meaning that society may have chosen to give it. So my dictionary, when I look at the word justice, it talks about peace and fairness. Now, when I think about emotional justice, I think about the seeking that I talked about earlier, trying to find peace within yourself, and also being fair to yourself. And when I talk about being fair to yourself, I'm referring to treating yourself nicely and with kindness. Not beating yourself up for your emotional status, not beating yourself up for feeling depressed, for feeling anxious, for failing that task, for not getting that job, for not being able to impress that person, for not being able to conceive, for not being lovable. I mean, the list goes on. And I often hear the expression, my heart is telling me one thing and my mind says another. And this is where the linking of the two comes in, linking the emotional and the mental status. The mental aspect is our minds, our thoughts. It's those thoughts that we can and cannot control, those thoughts that we are desperate to try and control. And I think everybody's situation is unique. And this uniqueness is also apparent in the way that we deal with things. I'll give you an example. Let's say whilst two people can be put in the exact same situation, their coping mechanisms may differ drastically. And it's about acknowledging that within ourselves and to be able to understand ourselves and our abilities, but also as a support network to be able to acknowledge that for the person next to us and be able to say, let's say when you're thriving and they're not coping, not to call them weak or unstable, but to acknowledge that their coping mechanism is just different to yours. Because in another situation, they may thrive and you may not. And without that awareness, or even that self-awareness, let's say, how do we proceed? We can sometimes get stuck and this takes us back to that emotional and mental stability and instability. Comparing ourselves to the person beside us, saying, I'm not as good as them, or I'm not as capable as them. But actually, we're all individuals. We're not running a race against each other. We're just living life and trying to get through it. Now, to link the emotional and the mental. For the mental, we can use our minds to think, to put ourselves in a position to try and understand our emotions. Why are we feeling these negative emotions? And this can be a very difficult thing to do. I know that. I've been there, especially whilst you're in the midst of all the confusion. How do you reason? But if we can seek to give ourselves that gift of empathic understanding, I truly believe that this could be the beginning of our healing process. So, empathic understanding. This is whereby you put aside your own ways of experiencing and perceiving a situation, and you move on to experience and perceive things from the standpoint of somebody else. So, you seek to experience someone else's thoughts and feelings as powerfully as if they were your own. Essentially, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And as a counsellor, I have learnt the art of empathic understanding. But, we don't only have to give our clients that gift. We can give it to ourselves. You don't have to be a trained counsellor to give empathic understanding. And I think empathic understanding is one of the most beautiful things you can gift yourself. Learning to understand yourself. Where is that pain coming from? That low self-esteem? Who or what has caused you to believe that you are not good enough? Take ownership of your pain, because the healing starts with you. Thank you for listening. Please tune in to my next episode. It's going to be a 3-part series on body image and self-esteem. I will be talking to a very inspiring woman named Shelley Maddox. In this episode called Learning to Love Myself, she openly talks about her journey of shocking eating habits, poor self-concept, and how her low self-confidence played a big part in the negative choices she made with men. You won't want to miss it.
We all have emotions and think about things. Let's talk about